It's good to see you all, and it's been amazing being part of these 2 days, learning a lot from my colleagues and friends. Just feel like I've gone away for a symposium. Absolutely grateful to God for being in a place of reflection and sharing. So I've been given a task of just sharing a little bit of my reflection from a kind of theological and practical perspective, and hopefully address some of the challenges and opportunities we found in this context. This is my first appointment, so I'm on my 6th year. So the whole time just feels like a long reflection, a long time of listening and learning. And it's just wonderful to be in a place where you feel like you're kind of starting to make some sense of where you are and what God is doing and the people He's surrounded you with. And I say people because that keeps changing. In a place that's so transient. When you live in a place where most people haven't chosen to be there, it's a very different feel, especially when more people, struggle to make ends meet. They're either been there because they've been placed there by the council, or they're there because they've been moved from London so that Home Office can pay very little for their housing. So they haven't chosen to be there. So you're trying to build community with people who don't want to be there and can't wait to live. But there's also a core of people been there for 50, 60, 70 years, or all of their lives. So you've got this mix of people. So I'm just going to pause there and just say, for me, when we moved to Gateshead, when we were appointed to Gateshead, we went as a family, and we are a family, but not really knowing how God is going to place all of us to find our place. So me as a corps officer, my wife is a teacher, so she's teaching at a Catholic school in Newcastle. And then all my children, you've got a teenager and younger children, all of them kind of trying to find their place where we've been appointed. And for me, that's how I started my journey, that we've been sent as a family. So their place matters as much as my role as an officer. But I want to say right at the beginning, I think you said Tony's going to talk about buildings. I'm definitely not going to talk about buildings, but I might mention them. But most of you would have read Christopher's book, The Mission of God. But if you haven't, many people have used this over the years and gone back to it again and again. And he says it is not so much the case that God has a mission for his church in the world as that God has a church for his mission in the world. So if I'm going to be talking about building a church in the margins, my goal is not the church, but mission. The goal is not church, it's mission, because it's then the church that does the mission. And if we don't see it like that, we're going to employ all external circumstances to come and just do a project. And you can't build church just simply around projects. It needs to be built around people. And for me, so right at the set of this is my understanding of what the church's place is in the community. The church is the community. It's not a separate community in the community. And once you start working like that, then things are better. But I just want to point one thing for me that's been really crucial in this. So the task of building a church in marginalized and forgotten places, as many are called, and I'm starting to rethink the words we use. Is Gateshead a forgotten place? Or is the circumstances that the people living in the ones that put them behind everything else? So these kind of places like Gateshead and the broader Northeast reflects both the theological heart of Jesus' mission and the practical challenges faced by churches today. So Gateshead and the surrounding areas have long been associated with economic decline, social deprivation, and a sense of being left behind, and not even taglines like leveling up have been able to do anything about it. So I hope in our conversation, I'll be able to explore some theological grounding for mission in marginalized areas and provide some practical reflection on opportunities and challenges facing church in this context, particularly in the light of Jesus' mission to the lost, the last, and the least. So church building is about God's mission in the world. That's what it's about, God's action and work in the world. And we see that the biblical narrative consistently shows God's heart for the marginalized, which finds its ultimate expression in the life and ministry of Jesus. Jesus' mission to the lost, to the least and the last is central to his redemptive work. It's not accidental. It was very, very intentional. This mission is not just an act of mercy or pity, but is tied to the broader theme of God's kingdom breaking into the world. So the Gospel of Matthew, which has been a lot of my reflection recently, particularly chapter 9, provides a very profound insight into Jesus' mission on earth. And throughout this chapter, we see Jesus demonstrating a purposeful and compassionate pursuit of those who are lost, who are marginalized, who are downtrodden, often described as the lost, the least, and the last. I love this beautiful passage in Matthew 9, where we're told that Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. And it is a wonderful way of how Jesus saw those on the margins. So when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Now, Jesus approaches the margins with absolute passion and compassion. I just arrived back a few weeks from India, and I'd gone to see my sister, who's my nephew was having a heart operation. And I went to be with her in this difficult time because she was by herself in a new country, flying from Uganda because that's the only place they would do the operation. And I got an opportunity to go and see some of the Salvation Army centres and visit and see how they're working there. And very, very, very poor places. A complete shock for me. I grew up in one of the poorest countries in the world, but I've lived here for 21 years. And you sort of start living your context, don't you? You're talking about the poor, and then you go and see the poor of the poorest. And you think, oh, yet they did not describe themselves as poor. They just get on with life. And people becoming Christians, they're flooding their churches. And there was not that, oh, poor us. They're like, hey, come share what we have. And the stuff they were doing. So one of the centers I went to in Chennai, Central Chennai, they had a long list of the things they were doing in the community. And I took pictures and I just thought, if even I tried 3-4 of these, DH could be thinking, what are you doing? You're going to die. But they were doing them because that's what the people needed and that's where the people were. But on the wall, they had this massive picture of William Booth. And this, I've been trying to find this prayer. I'm told nobody knows where William Booth actually said it. But he was praying about his passion for the lost. And he said, if ever my soldiers and my officers lose passion and compassion for the lost, I pray that God will eradicate the Salvation Army off the face of the earth. Absolutely. What a prayer to have on your wall as people come in. It just hit me in the face, and I thought, this is why you do what you do. You believe that if you lose passion and compassion for the lost, you might as well pack up your bags and go. Because that's where Jesus is. He has absolute passion for all of us. And he has compassion in a way he approaches the margins. I said, this is why you're successful in building church. Even though you don't have 1% of the resources I have. So it put perspective into me being in Gateshead, feeling like I don't have enough resources to do what I feel God is calling me to do. God challenged me in that when I was thinking about being here to share with you. So that was really helpful for me. Well, Jesus' mission to the marginalized, his profound concern for them, when he says in Luke 4, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. Jesus' engagement with the lost and the last and the least highlights the inclusivity of God's kingdom, in which those on the fringes of society are given priority. I wonder how many of our churches or calls reflect this priority. We work the whole week with those on the margins, and we come together on a Sunday, and there's hardly anyone from the margins in our service. What does that say? Have we become content with just simply working with the margins, but we're not excited about them being church or sitting next to us and worshiping with us and sharing the life of the church? So we've got it the wrong way around. We work with the margins. We don't share fellowship with the margins. And I think for me, when this talk yesterday just really helped me so much to think about the center and the margins. Where are we? Where are we in our mission? Where are we in our discipleship? Where are we in our work? So we start separating mission during the week. We'll be in the margins for mission, but when we gather for worship, we're back to the center. We're surrounded by the center. Because it's too difficult, it's too hard to worship with the homeless, to worship with mums. We've got children and crying and running around everywhere, and they're single mums that don't have anybody else to help with it. And faces cringing when there's extra noise. We don't want to be here because the place is turned in a place for the children. Yes, this is the place that they should be. The church is called not just to serve the lost and the last and least, but to be church in those places. So theologically, this mission focus challenges the church to follow Christ's example, prioritizing those who are forgotten and overlooked. And this includes suffering communities that suffer with deprivation, unemployment, and social instability. Common features from where I live. But what for me was most important, because all of you get this, we're called to work with the poor. You get this. What I find most intriguing in my reflection was that the teaching of the kingdom in the Gospels shows a radical reversal of societal norms. So when Jesus says in Matthew 5, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," the least in the eyes of society are made central in the kingdom of God. In the parables such as the parable of the lost sheep and the Good Samaritan, Jesus consistently reveals God's heart for the marginalized. And I think it was N.T. Wright who said the parable of the lost sheep is a clear statement that the kingdom of God is open to all, especially those farthest away from God. And God rejoices over their return. The church in Gateshead, in particular the Salvation Army, the mission is just about rescuing people from poverty, but about welcoming them into the very center of the church's life and mission. So this necessitates a theology that prioritizes community, a theology that prioritizes relational ministry, and a focus on God's justice and mercy. If ever we had a model that would help with this, how do we prioritize the marginalized in our ministry? We decided for us at Gateshead that the church would become a living room for the community. And we started learning, how does that look like when people walk in? And I remember this when I lived in Lancashire. I was absolutely flabbergasted. Like a lot of the homes, this is 20 years ago, that I went to, people had friends who come through the back door, let themselves in, turn the kettle on, and start having a cup of tea before they even, their friends realized they were in a house. And they're, "Oh, you're here." And they already got a cup of tea. And they're walking around. So how does the church become a place where people walk in, make a cup of tea, sit down? They're not here for a program. They're not here to see anyone. They're not here because they need something. They're here because this is their place. This is their community. This is their family. And I can come and say, "Oh, hello, you all right?" I don't have even to ask, "What have you come for?" Because this is their place. Now, that has got a lot of challenges to come to that. But that's the dream. That's the dream. It starts to work on our minds and on our hearts, and people pick up on that. Not just what you do for them, but how you feel about them, how you think about them. And they come and sit next to you and start nudging like this. Don't need anything. Just come to say hello. When was the last time a homeless person just came to say hello? Not because they come to get food or extra things, but they just come to see you and sit next to you. That's where we need to get. And I've found that my reflection on an incarnational model, the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us, has been very helpful for me in those reflections. God becoming human in Jesus is the ultimate expression of God's identification with human suffering. And I was really challenged when Wendy said Jesus went to the margins and He stayed there. He didn't go there to rise from there as a glorified. He went and stayed there. We're reminded that the Word became flesh, made His dwelling among us. This teaches the church that we must be present in marginalized communities, not as distant benefactors or simply for charity, which is a challenge for us because part of our identity is we are a church and a charity. But as neighbors, we need to be present as neighbors. Just as Jesus moved into the neighborhood, the church must embody an incarnational presence in these places that are described as forgotten places, like Gateshead, living alongside those we seek to serve. I find that as a challenge because I live on a lovely village where the best housing is, and I walk across my people, my congregation, who live in absolutely run-down, horrible housing with no garden, and I then go to church. And I'm surrounded by people who this is their living experience. And then I go home in my brand new car to a lovely village where we're surrounded by people who have got good jobs. And I'm conflicted. I don't want to invite people into my house because it's too nice. So I have food at the core. I made a nice garden at the core so we can stay and cook together and go in the garden and children can play and run around in the garden because they have no garden at home. They can stay longer and play during the weekend on Sunday, whilst working with the council and other organization to change the circumstance of their housing. Both of those things need to be happening at the same time. So I'm going to move on quickly to some of the challenges I've found while working there and some of the opportunities quickly, and I'll share a little bit of some of our success that we have found in this past 5 years. Well, for me, the economic deprivation and the social isolation and dislocation has been one of the biggest challenges. Jesus, we can see, demonstrated a purposeful, compassionate pursuit of those on the margins. But when you find yourself in a place with high employment rates, social dislocation, and a sense of hopelessness, high child poverty, it's very, very difficult to have hope. And even trying to give people hope feels like empty words. So it's got to be held by something. Like James says in chapter 2, it speaks of the futility of addressing spiritual concerns without addressing physical concerns. So if anyone says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? You think about your church in that sense, your call. What good is my church? First, that real question. What good is my church? And if I close down today, will there be an impact on my community? Will they notice that I even closed down or I'm not there? So churches must creatively engage in both social outreach and spiritual nourishment, addressing practical needs like food and shelter, employment support, as part of their sharing of the gospel. Not alongside, as part of sharing the gospel, because it is sharing the good news of Jesus. And that has real practical challenges in terms of resources, how long it takes people to be ready to be part of the mission. So when someone comes in, just come into the country, the journey we go on for them learning English and getting their papers sorted and establishing themselves in the community, it's not a 2-month work. Some of the people I started working with 4 years ago now got jobs and settled or moved on. We've worked with them the last 4 or 5 years. And now they're full members of the church and the community. They're contributing. They're happy where they are. But that takes time. But I've also found this cultural resistance and mistrust and distrust, simply because some of these people, with years of economic hardship and broken promises from various institutions, this has led to distrust of organizations, even the Salvation Army, including, the church in general. So in Gateshead and other deprived areas, people may view the church as irrelevant or disconnected from their struggles. This presents a significant barrier to evangelism and church growth. But to overcome this, churches must engage in long-term relationship buildings. And programs like addiction recovery and mental health support or youth mentoring that require long-term focus help people understand that you're committed to walk alongside them in solidarity, not just offering quick fixes. You need food? Yeah, we could do something about that, and that's it. I don't want to ask any more questions because I'll be worried about how I'm going to respond to the rest of their needs. But if I give them food and tell them on your way, then I don't have to worry about where they're taking food. But the way you do things can change this. I've taught my volunteers to ask more questions in a good way. Don't just say, so do you have something to cook with? So, because that will change what kind of food I can offer. So have you got options for kettle, for something for just a kettle, something to just take away, something to cook with? All of these things matter. They build relationship, but they also help you understand the situations that people are in. I've been really struggling with this. A lot of people come to us and they're not sure of us. They're not sure if we're a church. They're more sure that we're definitely a charity that can help, but they're not sure we're a church. And then when you say you're a church, there's a bit of a suspicion. You suddenly join the other institutions that they've been concerned about, either through lived experience. I say mistrust because mistrust is perceived from what they've heard. But distrust means there is evidence. People have experienced being rejected. They've experienced the church not being a warm, welcoming space for them. But both of those things have worked together to create that barrier of relating to us and relating to what we do. And I think we need to think about this. I'm not so worried about the fact that people come to us and think we're charity. That's fine, because that, through conversations and getting to know each other, they will understand then that we are church. In fact, I see it as positive that people feel they can trust us with their needs, with their concerns, with their worries. What I'm challenged about is when they come, we're not equipped to help them journey from their felt needs, from what they came with, to a place of hope and wanting to be part of church. That is where the problem is. Working with people, in our centre, we got about 500 people come through our church every week. And I tell people, you could get excited about that. No, but really the real thing that we need to celebrate is the fact that there's mission. Mission is growing. There's engagement. We're increasing our sphere of influence where we can speak hope and speak life. That is the real miracle. And then seeing some people making that journey into becoming part of the Salvation Army's mission and ministry and becoming part of the kingdom. That is then when we see proper fruit of what we're doing. But we need to see all of this as important as people making the journey into the kingdom. Until we see that, the journey will start when people make commitments, rather than when we encounter them, when they first walk through that door and say, I have no food. That's where the journey begins of discipleship, not after. So I can see I'm being ushered for the time. But this is engaging with the whole person, focusing on discipleship, reaching a generation in crisis. We've been focusing a lot more with young people at Gateshead to make sure there's a safe space for them to come and make friendships and do stuff outside of the core and inside of the core. And because of those relationships, our church is looking very different and focusing on long-term commitment. I'm going to finish with this in a minute. I'm going to ask for your prayer because that's Gateshead there. It's the only core left in Gateshead. It's a massive town and had about 6-7 cores many years ago, and all of them are closing one at a time. And then Felling and Gateshead Citadel came together to buy that place in Sunderland Road and join together so they don't die out. And we became Gateshead Community Church. So there is all of those stories coming together. About 30 people moved in 11 years ago. And when I came in 5 years ago, it was about 60. So there was a difference. And now we're a church of about 146. That's church growth in real terms, in numbers, as well as mission. And other people have moved on to other cities. We've worked with more people than are in the church. And that's okay. But if you see in that picture, that land, you could see one of the high-rise buildings, and there's another one next to it. Lots of alcohol abuse and drug problems. But that land, all that grassy land surrounding the Salvation Army, we've applied for that land because I want us to invest and buy that land for the future of God's work and mission that I know will inevitably grow. We're bigger than the church we're in, and we have to work a lot harder to turn things around to do different programs. So please pray for that. We look after the grass area. You could see the young people playing football at club. We use the outside a lot. But it's not ours yet. We're still in the process of trying to acquire that. And some of you would have seen a beautiful picture on Facebook of our 15 junior soldiers, which is for me is a picture of not becoming weary in doing good. For the proper time we will reap harvest if we do not give up. So those young people and their families, 3 of those are mine, so they're part of the journey. But there is about 9-10 nations represented there, and a number of families I've been working with for the last 3 years. So that, for me, is fruit of a lot of work. So for the families to get to a place where they trusted Salvation Army, these are first-generation Salvationists. They became Christians in our church. So for me, that is the fruit. They became Christians in our church. Their parents are doing soldiership and membership classes. So in 2 weeks, 3 times, we have another 10 adults and 5 young people becoming members and soldiers and adherents. And I want that to continue. But that's work that started when we arrived. It's not just happening now. But if we keep working like that, God will keep adding numbers to us as in Acts. And that's church building. The mission grows, the church grows. The kingdom grows, the church grows. And that's the focus. The focus is mission, God's mission. And then leave the building of the church to God, because He will. he promised it. He said, I will build my church. And the gates of, you can fill that up. Whatever barrier you think you're in, whether you were on the farthest margins or you feel you're more in the center, wherever you are, whatever the barrier for people becoming part of the kingdom, Jesus has promised he will build his church nonetheless. We do his mission. We participate. We get involved. And he does that. And that's not work of me. It's a work of a big team of children and youth workers and parents and the core supporting these young people whose parents are doing night shifts, 12 hours at night. They're sleeping in the morning at the service because they're not able to turn up. We've done classes over 8 months because the kids are not able to be in certain places with their parents at certain time. It's challenging, but it's possible. It's not impossible. So, sorry, I've gone on further than I should have, but please pray for us as we pray for you. And I invite any questions you might have if we still have any time. Thank you.